on this
Okay.
computer. Come on, work.
Wonderful.
Okay, supposedly it's recording. So it says, yeah, it says up there it's recording. So we're getting there. Let's see who is. Paulina's here. And we said Adi is here. And Christina. So we're missing one. We'll just wait, give Christina a couple of minutes to make it. That a dream catch you have there, Adi?
Yes, I do. Yes.
All right. Just no nightmares, right?
Oh, no. It's all good, sweet dreams.
All right, we have a new student with us tonight. Mackenzie and Jonathan's with her.
Yes. Hello.
All right, and they're not used to all my terrible jokes that they have to be able to laugh at.
Right.
We are talking about Shabbat this evening. Last week we went over issues of Shabbat observance in the sense of what we classify as permitted and non-permitted behavior patterns, how the halachas of what you can and cannot do on Shabbat. And I sent you, and I realized after I sent it, I didn't do all the English on some of what I sent out, so I have to redo the English, but you can look it up in the Bible anyway, okay? So tonight, really what we're going to concentrate on is what you put into the Shabbat. Just to briefly recap, the traditions of Shabbat restrictions opens up the door to fill it with something. Just to sit around and do nothing is not worth anybody's time. I suppose you want to sit and contemplate your navel, it's okay. But that's not the Jewish way of doing things. So we want to fill in the Shabbat with meaningful activities, meaningful observances that give a sense to us as to what it's all about. Just again, briefly to recap, we said last week that there were two aspects of the mitzvah of Shabbat, as recorded in the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments. One is a universal cosmic ideal. 7 days, God made the earth in 7 days. On the 6 days, on the seventh day, He rested, which is a cosmic idea behind Shabbat to tell us that God is the creator of the universe. However you want to understand the concept of God, certainly traditionally Judaism understands it to mean the force that caused the existence of everything. Maimonides in his Articles of Faith talks about in very Aristotelian terminology, and one of the things that he says is that if you could imagine the world not existing, God would still exist. But if you could imagine God not existing, the world could not exist. So one of the major differences that I stress between purely scientific view of the universe and the Jewish religious view of the universe is that there is a divine aspect to it, causative. The universe exists for a reason, not pure accident. The methodology, the chronology, what takes place, all of that, that's really the realm of science. And we'll talk about Genesis later on. We can get into the biblical parts as well. But as far as I'm concerned, Jewish tradition is not trying to tell us whether or not all of matter was condensed in this one infinitesimally small speck that erupted into the original creation of the universe at the Big Bang, or that God made it in 7 literal days. I don't believe that. No, most people, I think, believe that. But that's not the point. The point is God is the source of the universe, the divine source, whatever. Again, we'll talk about God more. We'll talk about what that means in different people's interpretations of it. I'm a traditionalist, so I'll warn everybody. I believe in a personal God. Others do not. Maimonides, again, to reference the great philosopher and Jewish decisive of Jewish law, it was very Aristotelian. His vision of God is a very mechanistic kind of vision of God, the prime mover, the first mover. All right? So that's the cosmic concept of Shabbat. The other is introduced in the Ten Commandments, says it's repeated in the book of Deuteronomy, says that we are to remember that we were slaves in Egypt and God took us out of Egypt. And so it's more of a social construct, I believe. The idea of the Shabbat is to remind us that all life is precious. No one ultimately should be serving anyone else, that everyone should have the opportunity to enjoy life and to rest on the seventh day. Tell that to your bosses at work, I know. Okay, but what I am saying is that in the wording of the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy, that's the rationale given for it. So we have 2 rationales. You can't see my hands all the time. I like to be, but anyway, in a very Jewish way. On the one hand, we have God who created the universe, and that's why we observe the Shabbat. And on the other hand, we observe the Shabbat because God took us out of Egypt. Okay? So now, whether or not we do anything, it is Shabbat. Right? If you look on the calendar, the 7th day of the week, according to all of Western society. What? I say something? Somebody?
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
So, is it okay to ask a question?
Of course. There's the thing of wave a hand or something there. I think you can do that. That kind of might catch my eye.
I'm sorry, I couldn't find it on the screen. But I remember that
where's it? A reaction? No, not reaction. Participants, chat, share screen, mute.
I see the reaction.
It is the reaction.
There's the reaction?
Oh, okay.
All right. We're still novices at this. For a little while longer,
So,
I hope not much. Yeah.
In the future, I'll put the reaction. But my question was that last week, I thought there was 3 things. One was the cosmic from creation, from Genesis.
Yeah.
Then there was a part about Exodus, which is that we're supposed to copy what God does. And then the third was from Deuteronomy.
Well, what I said, all right. Well, what it is the following. All right. In Exodus, it gives the cosmic rationale. 6 days God made heaven and earth, the 7th day rested. In Deuteronomy, it gives this more social rationale. You were slaves in Egypt, I took you out of Egypt. And what I said was that these are different ideas behind it. In Genesis, we have the story, at least the biblical story of this first Shabbat. And God rests from the Melakha, the work which he had done, and we imitate God by refraining from that work. Okay, is that clarified a little bit?
So then there's really 2. It's cosmic, which is based on creation and Exodus, and there's social, which is only based on Deuteronomy.
Yeah, that's a description. I mean, I think it's worthwhile understanding of those things. It's not. I doubt anybody's going to ask you about those 2 particular aspects.
Okay, then in that case, no.
No. You're supposed to remember everything that I say. All right?
No, I was just confused, but thank you.
Okay, but what I mean by it is, there are 2 rationales that are given biblically, and then how do we observe it is in part through imitatio Dei, as they say in Latin. Any Latin scholars here? So I can get away with whatever I want to say in Latin. Okay. Cogito ergo sum. All right, I think therefore I am, to quote Descartes. Okay. So those are the rationale behind it. That's what gives rise to all of the laws trying to define how to observe the Shabbat, what not to do. That whole list of the 39 categories of labor, of Melakha that I sent out, I'll guarantee you don't need to remember all 39 of them. I will not test anybody. But the idea that there are 39 categories of labor is a nice thing to remember if I ask that on a test. Okay. So now, but what I was saying is that Shabbat comes no matter what we do, right? We don't create the existence of Shabbat, but what we do is sanctified by our behavior and our actions. Excuse me, just a second. Okay. That wasn't anything I needed to worry about. Take garbage out. And indeed, the Talmud discusses what happens if somebody somehow gets lost in the middle of the desert and he doesn't know what day of the week it is. What are they supposed to do? And then either he counts the day as the first day of the week, and then seventh day after that is Shabbat, or he tries to figure out when Shabbat was the best of his ability. But the idea is you make Shabbat until you find out whether you're right or wrong. And in essence, unless we turn Saturday into Shabbat, for our lives, it won't mean anything. If it's just another day on the calendar, if it's the first day of the weekend, it's a day off of work, there's nothing of great value intrinsically to that. And indeed, we use the language of making Shabbat. I'm going to make Shabbos. So regardless of what we do, it is Shabbat, it is Shabbos, but we have to make it into a Shabbat for ourselves in our lives. So there are rituals as well as restrictions that surround Shabbat. The first and most important thing is we have to make it special. Right now, I don't get to shul. I can't go to the synagogue. Some synagogues have got various setups for people to come to pray, to daven. But I don't do that right now. So everything takes place in my home. But preceding Shabbat, we start getting ready. And how do we get ready? Well, one thing is we know that traditionally, according to the 39 categories of Melakha, we can't cook on Shabbat. And today it's very easy with refrigeration and all of that. It's not a big deal. So we have to prepare our food that we're going to consume on Shabbat. Some of you may think of Shabbat as being the night where you have chicken soup and roast chicken. All right? You can, but you don't have to. What if you are a vegetarian? There's nothing wrong with being a vegetarian, having a vegetarian Shabbat. What it is supposed to be special. Now, in the days of the Talmud, and earlier when the laws and traditions were first developing, the ideal was that you had to have meat. If you didn't have meat any other day of the week, on Shabbat or a holiday, you had meat. Because that's special. You know, when you have a banquet to honor somebody, you usually don't put out grilled cheese sandwiches or tuna fish sandwiches, right? Or even hot dogs. I like hot dogs. But, you know, you put out something fancy, something nice. And if you are vegetarian, then you make a special vegetarian dish. So the importance is not what the meal consists of, but that the meal is prepared in advance as something special. That's the most important element of it. and you do an event. I'll tell you the truth. My wife, bless her, Saturday night, she's already thinking about what she's going to cook for next Shabbos. No, nobody has to be that crazy. But certainly before the weekend is over, she pretty much knows what she's going to have. And she's got the pile of cookbooks up to here. You know, she's kind of short, so it's not so hard to get up there. But and she strives very hard to have different special meals each Shabbat. If you want, she's got several notebooks filled up with the menus that she's had over the years. I'm sure she'd be happy to send it to you for a small fee. But the preparation and the special quality of it is what's important. Now, Shabbat begins at sunset. We talked last week a little bit, and we talked earlier the idea of lighting candles before the sun sets. In North America, the tradition is usually 18, some to 20 minutes before Shabbat. We light the Shabbos candles, the Shabbos licht, the Shabbos lamps. Now, the origin of this goes back to the world in which that was the only light they had. If you don't want to sit in the dark and have a meal in the dark, we mentioned that before, you had to have something burning in advance. And so the origins were very practical. And we're told in the Mishnah that, what kinds of wicks and oils are good for the Shabbos licht. By the way, it's a Yiddish word for lamps. For the Shabbat candles, the Shabbat lamps. Those that burn nicely and don't smell too much. Olive oil was considered to be the best. And actually, that's what my wife and daughter use, and daughters-in-law use. You have glass holders, and you put some water in, and you put olive oil into that, and you have floating wicks, and now you got a nice Shabbos licht, right? But the Talmud itself doesn't say anything about a blessing. All right? We don't really know when the blessing came to be. And I probably said this, I repeat myself a lot during the course of this course. It may have been during the 9th century or so when the Karaite schism came up and they rebelled against the rabbinic interpretations of the Torah and said, they interpreted you shall not kindle a fire in your settlements on Shabbat to mean you can't have any fire burning on the Sabbath. And so the Karaites do not light any kind of lamps. The rabbis insisted, based upon the Talmudic precepts, that we should have, and maybe to emphasize it, they said you say a bracha. Every bracha, every blessing that we recite over an action that is regarded as a mitzvah, a commandment, begins with the same opening formula. In Hebrew, it's Baruch Atah Adonai. Baruch means blessed or praised, source of blessing. If you want to get into all of that another time. Are you? That's Atah. Atah is you, direct person. Adonai. Adonai is the way we pronounce the name of God, his personal name, his first name, as it were. When Moses has the vision of God at the burning bush, and he says, what is your name? And God says, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. I shall be, or I am what I am, or what I will be. Ehyeh is a verb meaning of being. And assumed by most authorities that the name of God, the Yud, He, Vav, He, derives from that verb of being. God is being. The letters, and if I were to write them in English, there are no vowels in the Torah, would be, today we would say Y, H, W, H, or VH. Okay? Now, that gives us an inkling of how it was pronounced. The Y, Y. When you have the letter Hey following another consonant, it often indicates that the sound is an Ah. Then you have the letter Vav, which while in biblical times was probably pronounced as a W, like in Arabic. Wah. Today it's pronounced as a V sound. And then an Hey on the end again, so Yava or Yahweh. And you will see that in a lot of critical biblical studies, they will write it out that way. Some will just write it YHVH or WH. Some will say it's Yahweh. We don't know, but in Jewish tradition, we do not pronounce the name of God as it is written. Instead, we substitute the title Adonai, which means my Lord. So when we see Yud Hey Vav Hey written in the text, today, the traditional Jewish way of dealing with it is to pronounce it as Adonai, my Lord. And without going into too great of depth on that, sometimes they'll put some of the vowel indicators in there, and that's why in the Middle Ages they thought it was Yehovah, as a result of a misunderstanding of what was taking place. Okay, so Baruch Atah Adonai, praise to you, source of blessing in you. Blessed be you, Lord our God. Melech HaOlam, used to be always translated King of the universe, sovereign of the universe if you don't want a masculine of it. Hebrew is, everything is in Hebrew is masculine or feminine. God is usually referred to in the masculine. In ancient world, that was always considered the stronger, the bigger aspect of things. However, the divine presence, the feeling of God's closeness and nearness is a feminine name, the Shekhinah, the divine presence. God is neither male nor female. Regardless of pronouns that we may use, they are meaningless because God is asexual. Sexuality has nothing to do with God. Okay? So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, praise you, Lord our God, sovereign, King of the universe. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav. Asher, who? Kiddushanu, made us holy, sanctified us. B'mitzvotav, through or with his commandments. Vitzivanu, and commanded us, and then comes the verb of what we're talking about doing. Lahadlik ner shel Shabbat, to kindle the lamp of Shabbat. If I were going to be putting on a talit, who sanctified his commandments and commanded us to wear the tzitzit. And on Sukkot, to wave the lulav, or whatever it may be, to wash the hands, all of these things are introduced by that same formula. So once you learn that, you've now learned a very basic form of blessing that will carry over to everything. And other blessings begin similarly too. Baruch atah Hashem, praise you, Lord God, King of the universe. But then there will be a different continuation of the blessing. Okay. So again, to reiterate, I mentioned before that we're not supposed to light a fire on Shabbat. On the other hand, the lighting of the Shabbat candles is seen as the acceptance of Shabbat. So how can you say the blessing, the blessing is normally done before the action. If the blessing creates that moment of accepting Shabbat, you've now accepted Shabbat before you've lit the candles. So Ashkenazic tradition, I think we had somebody Sephardic tradition, didn't we? Do we have anybody Sephardic tradition? Or Italian? Yeah, sort of Sephardic tradition. Okay, the Italians have their own way. Okay, unless they are really, now then there's Sephardim who came to Italy too. Okay, Rosalind's saying John was a Sephardi too. Is that what you're saying?
I was asking him.
And what was his answer?
Ashkenazi.
Ashkenazi. Yeah. Okay. You're one of the good guys, not one of the bad. You know, like everybody else, we have our ins and outs and all kinds of playing games with each other. Okay. Anyway, the Ashkenazic tradition, which is often a little more stringent than the Sephardic tradition, we therefore light the candles first, cover our eyes. There's sometimes a whole ceremonial. Hi, Christina, you made it. She didn't hear me, I don't think. She's connecting to audio. Hi, Christina, glad you made it. Okay, so there's a waving of the hands, mystical ideas behind it. Cover the eyes, recite the blessing, the bracha, take our hands away. We look at the candles, and now we have the Shabbat candles lit. And again, well, traditionally, it was the mother of the household's job to light the Shabbos candles. The importance is there has to be Shabbos candles. When my wife is gone somewhere for a weekend or whatever it may be, and I'm left alone, I light the Shabbat candles. Nowhere is it written that a woman has to be the one who lights the Shabbat candles. But in very traditional households, there are often gender separation of duties. And so the tradition was that the woman in the household would light the candles. And it's still done, I would say, in most households, even liberal ones, where the woman of the house takes care of lighting the candles. All right? But in any case, they should be lit. They should be lit at least near where you're going to eat your dinner. Some have the custom of putting it on the table itself. There are issues there we won't go into. We have a server behind our dining room table, and that's where we light our candles. Now, traditionally, we had a schedule, as it were, of Shabbat. We said already that you start preparing in advance. Get everything ready, so including bathing and shaving or whatever you're doing to get ready for Shabbat for a nice occasion. Putting on your nice clothing, putting at least nicer clothing than you would be wearing to usher in the Sabbath. In tradition circles, we're supposed to pray 3 times a day. We'll talk about prayer services more in detail. There's a morning prayer service, there's an afternoon prayer service, and there's an evening prayer service. Ideally, this is done as a community, part of the minyan. So the tradition was, and we're not bound by this exactly, but the tradition was, as I said, the woman in the household had been busy getting everything ready. She'd been cooking and baking and making whatever is going to be made before the modern era where you can go out and buy your Shabbos dinner if you want. And she cleaned the house because the husbands don't know how to clean houses. Even today, I'm a lousy house cleaner. I do the floors. I do vacuuming and floor scrubbing. Okay. Poorly, but I do scrub the floors. But, you know, the reality was women going back centuries ago did not attend synagogue services all that much. So the most traditional pattern was the man of the household, the males of the household would go to the synagogue early enough to recite the afternoon service before sunset. They would be in the synagogue for the evening service, which we will talk about in a moment. And when the evening service was over, they went home. Some Jewish women, and one of my daughters-in-law does it this way. She always prays at home. She prays all the prayer services, but she rarely goes to the synagogue. That's her choice, right? And in the very, very frum world, very, very Orthodox world, that is often the case. Certainly on Friday night, because by the time she's gotten ready for Shabbat, who wants to go schlepping to the synagogue and then back again, especially if it's a long ways away? Today, many women will go to the synagogue. You know, it just depends on what you feel like and your customs and how things work out for you. All right. So the tradition was the man went to the synagogue. When synagogue services were over, he would come home, and he would have two accompanying angels coming with him. And when he gets to the door of the house, and he opens the door, and he looks in, and if everything is the way it should be, the house is all set up, the candles are lit, the table with the finery is all set out, that one of the angels says, may it be this way from this Shabbat to the next Shabbat. And the other angel says, Amen. On the other hand, if he comes home and it's not that way, table's not set, and the kids are running around creating havoc, and there's all kinds of problems at home. Now the other angel says, may it be this way from this night until next week, and the former angel has to say amen to that. That's the idea of why we sing Shalom Aleichem, welcoming the angels. It's found already in the Talmud. Okay, but so that's the basis of that hymn. But anyway, so we come home. Like I say, we'll go back to the synagogue service in a minute or two. And we have a ritual that we follow for the table. Number one, like I said, we set the table with our finery. Preferably not paper plates and plastic utensils if you can do it. If you can't, you can't. You know what you can do. And there should be 2 loaves of bread, uncut bread on the table, 2 challah rolls or 2 challahs. Challah, today, it means a Shabbat bread. It's not what it originally meant, but that's how I use it today. The explanation given is we have 2 loaves of bread on the table to represent that during the time of wandering in the wilderness, during the 40 years after the Exodus from Egypt, manna fell every day, every morning. They got their manna from heaven. And they were supposed to collect just enough food for that one day. And if it collected too much, it would start to rot. But on Friday, they would receive a double portion because there would be no manna on Shabbat. They weren't supposed to go out to look for manna on Shabbat. So to symbolize the double portion of manna that fell on Friday night, tradition, and Shabbat lunch, and preferably Shabbat afternoon, the tradition is to have 2 complete loaves of bread. It doesn't have to be challah, by the way, but that's what's traditionally done. And challah is usually nicer bread, but it's 2 loaves of bread. Today we have, the braided bread. It's very clear from the biblical account and from early rabbinic accounts, they probably had big pita. That's how they made bread. That was their bread, pita. Right? So anyways, we have the 2 loaves of bread on the table, either on a tray or sitting on the tablecloth. There is a tradition that says, why the white tablecloth? Because again, the biblical account is that before the manna fell, first came down the dew, and then came down the manna, and then came another layer of dew to protect the manna. Another explanation given, the one that I also think is a very educational one, is that if we don't have wine available to make the kiddush, which I'll again get to in a minute, if we don't have wine available, we can say the blessing of kiddush using the challah, using the bread. So that's new to a bunch of people here, right? So, forgot to get wine, didn't get any grape juice. There's no Manischewitz. Who wants Manischewitz? Nice Cabernet, Semillon. They're very great. They're very good kosher wines out there today. You don't have to drink Manischewitz, thank goodness. But anyway, but if you didn't have any, you in theory could say the kiddush, but instead of saying Borei Pri Hagafen, the blessing for the wine, you would say Amotzi Lechem min haaretz, brings forth bread from the earth. So now, since you could have made the Kiddush on the bread, and you're not going to make Kiddush on the bread, the poor bread is going to be embarrassed. So we cover it so it shouldn't see you making Kiddush over the wine. Right? Or I don't know if you can hear or not. But obviously, it's a nice story, and it's good to tell your kids, because if we learn to be sensitive to even inanimate objects that obviously don't have feelings, it's a lesson to us to always be aware of the feelings of others. So the very essence of that mitzvah of the double portion of bread on the table teaches us a very important life lesson. So we have the bread on the table, we have the wine. Many people have nice Kiddush cups to make Kiddush on. You can use glassware later on to drink the wine. Silver is not good, doesn't give good taste to the wine. So we make Kiddush on the Kiddush cup, and then we have glasses for the wine later on. Okay, so it's all set. So everybody gathers around the table, whomever is there, whatever the situation is. There are different customs of standing, sitting. I don't remember. They've talked about it in the book that I asked you to read. Some stand for this entire portion of this. Some sit for part, stand for part. My tradition is to sit. Usually we start off singing the Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem Malchei Sharet Malchei Elyon Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the hymn to welcome the ministering angels. I mentioned, they came to the door with you. Right? Peace unto you. Bless us with peace, and may your going out be in peace. This is a very old tradition, probably may even be pre-Kabbalistic tradition, or certainly the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, the mystics, found it to be important. And so the tradition is we start with that. Then there's an old tradition that does go back to the times of the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists in Sfat in the 16th, 17th century, to recite the last part of the last chapter of the book of Proverbs, which starts off, Eshet Chai Miimsa Rachel Mibni Micha Batach Balev Bala Baal Sholach Mizu. How precious or how hard it is to find the woman of valor, the great woman, her worth is far above rubies. Now, the Kabbalists, which most people again don't realize, the Kabbalists were not talking about a woman, a human being. They were talking about the divine presence. Remember I said a little earlier, the divine presence was seen as feminine. And so in Kabbalistic literature, they always used feminine pronouns and things of that nature, referring to God's divine presence. In the spring, we talk about Kabbalah and mysticism. If you stay around that long, you can get some of that in for you. But it all was seen as referencing to the mystical aspect of God's presence. Now, it's from the book of Proverbs. It is a biblical passage. And that passage probably really was meant to refer to a woman, the woman of the traditional household. And when you read what she had to do for the household, you'll be very happy that you don't live in that age anymore. It's the last chapter of the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 31. If you've gotten the prayer books that we asked you to get, you'll see it's in there for the Friday night service at home. Some women today don't like it. I know, again, in the book that we asked, Day Apart, right, that they talk about that some women don't like that anymore. You deal with that with you and your rabbi and what you feel comfortable with. A number of years back, I don't think the men were complaining, but the women wanted to say something for the husband, so they were started to try and make a tradition of reciting some kind of hymn to the husband. Some places the husband says the Eshet Chayil. Everybody says it. My household, we all sing it together. After the Eshet Chayil, we then will make the Kiddush, the blessing over the wine and the blessing for the day. Now, the word Kiddush has the basic root of 3 letters. All Hebrew words basically consist of a 3-letter root with other things added on to make different sense of meanings to it. But in English, if we said the kuf, say the letter K in English, dalid, D, and then SH, the shin, all right? Those 3 letters have the meaning of distinctiveness, difference, set apart, hence holy, sanctified. So the Kiddush is not the prayer over the wine. The Kiddush is the sanctification of the Sabbath, and we use the wine as part of that ritual. In many Jewish rituals, wine is a component of the ritual. When we do a Brit Milah, when we have a ritual circumcision, we use a cup of wine. When we get married, we use the blessings of marriage are said over a cup of wine. The blessings of creating the engagement, the betrothal, the erusin, and the blessings for the wedding itself, and the birkat hamazon following the wedding meal for a week after, we use wine as part of that ritual. When Shabbat ends, we use wine as part of that ritual, but it's ancillary. It's part used in the ritual, but it's not the core meaning of the ritual. That's why I said if you didn't have wine, you use the bread. So now, what do? The first, at home, we read first the paragraph, the heaven, earth, and all the hosts are finished. In other words, we read the account of the first Sabbath as found in Genesis, the beginning of chapter 2 of the book of Genesis, Sefer Breshit. We then say the blessing for wine. Wine was regarded as a very special drink by the ancients. In Jewish tradition, as I said, we use it for lots of rituals. It retains that special quality. So it has its own special blessing. We're talking about grape wine, either grape juice or grape wine. Any other kind of wine, we don't say this blessing. The blessing for grape wine is Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, praise you, Lord God, King of the universe, Borei Pri Hagafen, who creates the fruit of the vine. And it's interesting, the wording is creates the fruit of the vine, but if I'm going to eat a grape, I don't say that blessing. The blessing for a grape is the same as any blessing for any fruit that grows on a tree. But when I'm drinking grape juice, whether it be wine or not, a special blessing of Borei Pri Hagafen, the fruit of the vine. So we've started, we said the blessing of the wine, and now we make the real Kiddush, which follows after that. Asher Kiddush I start to stumble when I say it by heart. Let's see, where do we have the Kiddush in here? I have it here somewhere. I'm on the right page. Oh, there. Okay. As he translates it, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who made us holy with your commandments and favored us, your holy Shabbat, in love and favor. I don't like that translation. Anyway, you gave us as our heritage a reminder of the acts of creation. For it is the first among days called holy, a reminder of the exodus from Egypt. For you have chosen us to serve you and set us apart from all other peoples. Your holy Shabbat with love and favor you have given us as our heritage. Blessed are you, Lord Adonai, who makes Shabbat holy. The Kadesh HaShabbat. That's the real Kiddush. So we have 3 parts to what we say at the table. We have Vayachulu, the passage from Genesis, which is said as a dut, a kind of a testimony that God is the author of creation. And that's why some stand for that, because in the rabbinic age, witnesses always stood in court. Some would stand for Vayachulu and then sit down for the rest of the Kiddush, because you're going to be consuming the wine at a meal, and they insist you have to be seated for a meal. Others would say standing all the way till the end and then sit down to drink the wine. And then everybody has some of the wine. Some households, what they do is everybody has their own wine. Other households, the person who recites the Kiddush may pour out to everybody in their own little cups, or in less sanitary situations, everybody takes a drink from the same Kiddush cup. I don't do that. My wife and I share the Kiddush cup. Everybody else gets poured out for them. Okay? Now, once we've said the Kiddush, we have another ritual that takes place. Now, my tradition developed that we do this at this point. Others do it right when the parents come home, and that is a blessing of the children. And again, you can either be individually or it can be as a group. Traditionally, what we say is to sons, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh, the sons of Joseph. And we're told that comes from the fact in the book of Genesis, we're told that's how Israel is supposed to bless their children in the future. Daughters, we will say, may God make you like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, the matriarchs of the Jewish people. And that is then followed by what we call Birchat Kohanim, the priestly blessings. Yirecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, may Lord bless you and guard you. Yirecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, may God bless you and watch over you. May God lift up his face unto you and grant you kindness. I missed that one. Cause his face to shine upon you. And the last was lift up his face to you and grant you peace. For various reasons, my tradition became to do that between Kiddush and washing of the hands. But like I said, a lot of more traditional way of standard of doing it is before the recitation of the Kiddush. And even before the Eshet Chayil and Shalom Aleichem, some have that tradition. Again, depending on your family and their size and the numbers, sometimes I'm blessed. I can give those blessings to my children and to my grandchildren, and my children give the blessings to their children. So it sometimes takes a little while before we finish all the blessings. All right, so now we are supposed to wash our hands. And now everybody, of course, I'm sure doesn't come to the table with dirty hands. This is not a cleansing washing. This is a ritual washing. The Bible speaks about ritual purity and ritual impurity, something that we really don't associate much with the world today. But when one was supposed to eat special foods of sacrifices, the ritual meals of the sacrifice, one had to be in a fully ritual pure state. And there were various ways of doing that. One way is to go to the mikveh. We talk about that in the spring again. Another way is to, depending upon the nature of the ritual impurity, was simply a way of washing your hands. You take a cup of water and you pour it twice. This is the way I do it. There's some variations there also. Twice on your right hand, twice on your left hand, and then before you dry your hands, you say the blessing. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kidshan mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim. Sanctified us by his commandments and commanded us concerning the washing of the hands. Now, by the way, you may say to me, Rabbi, where does God command that in the Bible? He doesn't. The rabbis came up with it. But the rabbis understood that they had the right to create rituals from based upon biblical understanding of the judges of each generation. And so when the ancient rabbis came up with these rituals, they felt entitled to say that they acted on behalf of God, and therefore we say a bracha, a blessing, which understands what we are doing ultimately comes from God. Now, since the ritual washing the hands is intricately tied to eating bread, that's why we're washing now, because we're going to consume bread. And again, in the ancient world, bread was the meal. Everything else was secondary to it. We talk about in Hebrew, kovea sudah, to establish a meal over bread. And what they would do is they would use the meat as an accompaniment to the bread. We in our world today, bread is not necessarily a major stay of life for us. But nonetheless, we still follow that tradition. So it's tied intrinsically and intricately to the eating of bread. So we wash our hands whenever we're going to eat bread traditionally and say the bracha. And then before we say the blessing over the bread, since those two parts are connected, we're not supposed to speak in between. We're not supposed to interrupt between the washing of the hands and saying the blessing and eating the bread. That's why you get your kids to do it first, and you tell them you can't talk, and so at least you got a little bit of silence for a few minutes in the night. Then you sit down at the table, and the tradition is you take the 2 loaves of bread, you mark the one that you're going to use and to cut. You put your little mark on it so you know where you're cutting. The one you're going to use, at least if you're only going to use one of the 2 loaves that night, goes on the bottom. So you have the 2 breads, one on top of the other. The bottom is the one you're going to use for the hamotzi. And that's because, remember we said there's a double portion of manna that fell in Shabbat. The manna that fell first is the ones you should use for Shabbat. So therefore the ones that fell on the bottom are the ones that fell first. The ones on top of them came later. So we're going to use the earlier falling manna, as it were, say the motzi, and the motzi is again, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, praise you, Lord God, King of the universe. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, brings forth bread from the earth. Then you cut the challah and you distribute it. Traditionally, we put it in salt, a little bit of salt. Salt was very important in the ancient world. All sacrifices had salt with them, and it was an important element of the meal to have salt, bread dipped in salt. And everybody has some of the challah, and we eat. And during the course of the evening, while we're eating, we should be talking with each other, sharing with each other, hopefully good things that we had during the week. There's traditions of singing Sabbath songs, mirot, that you will find in the prayer books and in special booklets for the Shabbat observance. All of these celebrate the Sabbath. Some people know some of the songs, some people don't know any of the songs, but that's one way of making it good, the night special. And as I said, the meals should be special, whatever it is, right? And when you finish the 12-course meal, well, let's see. Last week we had meat, sauce, and avocado, followed by chicken, barbecue. No, that was the barbecue chicken was for lunch. So this was the chicken with a peach sauce and string beans, because we had a lot of beans growing in our garden this year. Probably some rice, I don't remember for sure. And then we had brownies and parv ice cream for dessert. And good part of a nice bottle of wine. Finish the meal. If we finish singing, we're not singing, whatever the case may be. If somebody gives lessons, by the way, in a lot of households, especially when the kids go to the Hebrew schools and day schools, they get assigned by their teachers to teach something at the Sabbath table. So when I go to my grandchildren, to my son's house, my oldest of my children, which I haven't been able to see for a year now because of coronavirus, they almost always have an assignment from school, so each one has to give their little bit of Torah learning that they learned for the Sabbath meal. And then you recite the grace after meal, the Birkat HaMazon, and that's your Friday night dinner. And then you relax, you read a book, you talk some more. Don't rush through dinner. There's nothing that's important to follow. And I can guarantee, my Shabbos meal, the evening meal, usually comes about close to 2 hours. We're not in a rush. We're not going anywhere. We're enjoying each other. We have nothing else to worry about. And so that's what the Sabbath table should be like. I'm going to jump down to lunch, and then I'm going back to Sabbath observances of the rituals, of prayers and things after that. Shabbat morning after the synagogue, we come home. We're supposed to have, again, a nice meal. The lunch for Shabbat should be nice. The ancients liked the idea of having a hot meal on Shabbat. Well, and before modern ovens and stoves and kinds of things that we have today, that was difficult. So one of the ways that was invented by Jews was the creation of a thing called cholent. Anybody know what cholent is? You know what cholent is? Nobody really knows where the word comes from. Something that may come from French, Old French. Cholent basically is Jewish stew. And it's also said to be proof of the resurrection of the dead. I'll come back to that in a minute. What they would do, this was up, even till today, people do it, but now they have crock pots to do it. You would take a stew of some kind, beans, potatoes, when potatoes are around, some meat or chicken or whatever vegetables you wanted to do, you put it in a pot. You started cooking before the Sabbath. The local baker had these big ovens that because they were heated up to bake bread during the week, they remained hot for days afterwards, even without putting it in a fire. So they would bring the cholent pot to the baker, stick it in his oven, and everybody had their own pot, and they had it marked whose was whose, and they took it home after synagogue services, and they had a hot meal. And especially in a cold winter day, it's nice to have. Cholent's usually a very heavy meal. And I said about the joke about the resurrection of the dead is if you can eat cholent, take a nap on Shabbat afternoon and still get up before the Sabbath is over is proof that the dead can come to life. Right? But again, you don't have to have cholent. It's nice to have a nice meal. If you can have it warm, various ways of dealing with that. They have hot trays that you can put it on. If it's something you can leave in the oven overnight, again, you talk to your rabbi about what they advise you in terms of having a hot meal if you want to have a hot meal for Shabbat lunch. And again, it's usually by us a special meal. There's always some kind of first, the main course, and dessert. That's the second Shabbat meal. And then in the afternoon, before the Sabbath is over, and especially in the summertime when it's over very late, there's a tradition of having the third Sabbath meal, which is usually something very light. Some synagogues have pre-coronavirus days would have a meal at the synagogue, and usually it consists of some challah, again, 2 challahs, just like at lunch. I left out, you also had Kiddush at lunch, a different Kiddush. You can get by with something saying Brei Pri Hagafen over the wine for Kiddush for lunch. But Sudah Shlishit, the third Sabbath meal, was usually, in most synagogues, it consists of some rolls and maybe a piece of gefilte fish, or a nice piece of herring, and pickled herring, or cookies, whatever. And some even have a tradition of Saturday night after the Sabbath is over of having something nice that night. Right? Yeah, I had a question. Rosalind? No, you're just raising your hand. All right. Stretch. Okay. So the eating and drinking, and at each meal, the idea of sharing, sitting together, singing Sabbath songs are all part and parcel of that observance. All right, so now let's go back to the very beginning of the Shabbat and the synagogue service. what you have to understand, the basic prayer service consists of blessings that were created by the rabbis, recitation of psalms, biblical passages. That's what makes up the basic service. For the evening service on a weeknight, like tonight, it consists of two blessings that precede the recitation of the Shema. The Shema, hear, O Israel, Lord of God, the Lord is one, or Lord alone. We'll talk about that in more detail. That is preceded by two blessings, talking about God bringing on the day and night and giving us of the Torah. And then that is followed at nighttime by a blessing that talks about redemption from Egypt, and then a prayer asking God to watch over us at night. And then what we call the Shemona Esrei, referred to as the 18 blessings, which are actually 19 on a weekday, composed by the rabbis to create a sense of what Shabbat, of the prayer service. I have an English translation here somewhere, so I don't pull it through. All right. So, and I will send you eventually an outline with this basic information on it, but the evening, so the weekday evening service. As I said, in the synagogue, when we have a minyan, it begins by a call to prayer, Baruch Hu. We summon everybody to come to the prayer service. We then say, I said, the first blessing, which we say is, talks about God who divides between day and night, and then loves us by giving us the Torah. In the Shema, the 3 paragraphs of the Shema, which we'll go in detail to later on. God's redeeming us and God watching over us. Or in the week, a lot of synagogues have another passage that is added. We'll skip over that right now. And then we have, as I said, the Amidah. The Amidah begins with the words, "Blessed be Lord our God and God of our fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, great, mighty, awesome God, God most high, who bestows acts of loving kindness and creates all," etc. So we have 3 blessings at the very beginning, talking about God who was the shield of Abraham, the God who sustains us with loving kindness, who's a God over life and death. And then the last paragraph of that is the holy God, El HaKadosh, the holy God, or you grace humanity with knowledge. No, wrong line. Bless you, Lord, the holy God. On a weekday, I'm not going to go through it all right now. On a weekday, that is then followed by 13 blessings, talking about God giving us knowledge, God giving us health, God watching over us, redeeming us, etc., etc. Those are all petitionary in nature, asking God for things, and we're not supposed to ask God for things on Shabbat and holidays. So instead of those petitions on the Shabbat or on a holiday, instead of the 13 petitionary prayers, we say one prayer of referencing the day. So we talk about the Shabbat. On Yom Tov, on the holiday, we talk about the holiday. That's the middle blessing. The concluding blessings are always the same. We give thanks to God. We ask Him to accept our prayer, the restoration of our rituals, grant us peace, and then we take our leave, and then there's a concluding passage of the Aleinu, or what have you. Right? That's just in a nutshell. Now, the first major difference on Shabbat, besides the Shemona Esrei that I mentioned, is that the mystics of Tzfat, I mentioned them earlier, the Kabbalists, introduced the recitation of a number of psalms preceding the evening service. It's called in Hebrew Kabbalat Shabbat, the reception or receiving of the Sabbath. And again, this came from mystic circles. In the mystic circles, they were thinking of receiving the Shabbat, and the Shabbat is personified as a female, as well as the divine presence being personified as female. Not to say that God is female or male, or that the Sabbath is male or female, but that's the language used. And so there are a number of psalms, starting with Psalm 95, then 96, 97, 98, 99. You see something going on here. Then we go back to Psalm 29. One psalm for the 6 days of the week, and the Sabbath is coming up. Then there was composed by one of the mystics of Tzfat a hymn called Melakha Dodi. It's based on a statement that Talmud Melakha Dodi basically says, "Come, my beloved, to greet the bride. Let us welcome the Sabbath." So one is addressing their friend. Let us go greet the Sabbath. And in their day and age, it was said that they would go out into the fields towards sunset to, as it is, were to usher in the Sabbath queen, to be a real welcoming party. Today, we do this in the synagogue, but the last stanza, and I suggest you look at this on your own time. The last stanza says, "Come in peace, O crown of her husband," which could be the Sabbath or could be referring to the Shekhinah, the divine presence. "Come with joy and jubilation among the faithful of the treasured people. Enter, O bride, enter, O bride. Come, my beloved, to greet the bride. Let us welcome the Sabbath." And when we come to this last stanza, traditionally we turn to face the entrance of the synagogue. We're turning facing west, which is usually where the entrance of the synagogue would be, and bow, as it were, to the Sabbath queen as she comes in. Making a very kind of concrete act to welcome the Sabbath. And so this was added to give us a different dimension to the synagogue service. There are some also who even earlier in the evening, before this service, recite the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, Asher Li Shlomo, right? Which we'll look at it again later on, and when we look at the Bible, on its face is erotic love poetry, beautiful poetry, very X-rated in some ways, as it were, but was reinterpreted by the rabbis already 2,000 years ago to a reference of God's love for Israel and vice versa. So if you pick up the Art Scroll is a very traditional-minded book publisher in the Jewish world. They don't even translate the real translation of the Song of Songs or Song of Solomon. They just use the rabbinic interpretation, which gives you a very different idea as to what it's all about. But if you read the real translation, you'll see it was very erotic, probably created for marriage ceremonies or parties when people are getting celebrations for marriage. And similarly, as I said, we have certain hymns that we sing at the Sabbath table as well. Furthermore, after the end of the Amidah, which is only 7 blessings on Friday night, instead of the 18 that are really 19 blessings, we recite the paragraph of Genesis, talking about the creation of the world, some other words, and that's the evening. Now, the morning service The morning service is much more in length, but in essence, the same. It's introduced by blessings. We bless God for the various details of the day, for granting us life. One of the blessings that we have is we praise God that we are able to function, that our body functions. Our bodily functions work. In other words, after we go to the toilet, we thank God that everything works the way it's supposed to work. I know that often that sends people back. You make a blessing after you go to the bathroom? But once again, it's a very powerful message of how miraculous life is. And if you've been sick or you've had problems and it wasn't working right, then you really understand it. I tell people, I have a colostomy. I had cancer. And so I have a bag. So I really understand what it means to have the body function properly. Thank God for modern science. I'm alive today. But you think about it, it's really a complex, marvelous device, our bodies. So we thank God that it functions. We thank God that we wake up in the morning. We thank God for helping us to get dressed, that we can stand on our own 2 feet, that we see the world around us, that we have understanding, or one interpretation of the first blessing is the rooster crows in the morning. All right? All of these are marvelous things. We then follow by passages of study, because we're supposed to study every day. So at least have that. That's true on every day of the week. We then have a blessing that introduces a series of psalms or parts of psalms. On Shabbat morning, there's more there. Because on Shabbat, we're not hurrying off to work, so we have more time. So that part, which is called Psuke de Zimra, is much longer. It has a longer introduction to the Shema that we're going to recite. And then we have the call to prayer, to Baruch Hu again. Then we have 2 paragraphs of blessing. Again, we say the Shema. And this time we have 1 paragraph of blessing that follows. And then the Amidah. Weekdays, the 18 blessings, the actual 19 blessings. Shabbat and Yom Tov, 7. Now, what's also special in Shabbat, the Shabbat service, is that we have the opportunity to be in the synagogue, or at least in theory. We're not running off to work. We don't have to rush it. And if you've ever been to a traditional morning minyan, you know sometimes they go lickety-split. From beginning 10, 30 minutes, and you're out of there. So we read the Torah every Shabbat. We're coming up soon to the holiday of Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah, we complete the cycle of reading the Torah. And then as soon as the next Shabbat comes around, we start reading the Torah over again. We start with Genesis. And each week we read several chapters of Genesis. We finish with Genesis, we go to Exodus, we finish with Exodus, we go to Leviticus, we finish Leviticus, we go to Numbers, after Numbers, we go to Deuteronomy, and lo and behold, we're back at the end of the year again. I'm starting all over again. So we read from the Torah, there's a ritual of that, there's 7 are called up to the Torah, traditional synagogues only men, synagogues where women are called up to the Torah, they can be called up to the Torah. Usually there's a Torah reader who reads from the Torah scroll itself, because that's Hebrew without any kind of vowel markings or any cantillation markings, so you really have to prepare for it. In some communities, anybody call up the Torah is expected to read their own passage. So if you're going to a community like that, you're not going to get an aliyah. Then we also follow that with a passage called the Haftarah, a passage from one of the prophets, frequently from Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel the most often, but there are others that are used. that parallels either the holiday or the Torah portion for that Shabbat. We then have what is called the Musaf service. The Torah prescribes a sacrificial service that took place every single day. And animals and grain and oil and wine was used on the altar. And on Shabbat and on a holiday, there was an additional sacrifice. In Hebrew, musaf means the additional. So the musaf sacrifice was then paralleled by the rabbis with the musaf portion of the service. In traditional prayer books, it really is a prayer to God asking for the restoration of the sacrificial system. The Reform movement, for the most part, did away with it altogether. So in Reform and Reconstructionist circles, they don't have generally a Musaf service. The conservative movement, for the most part, reworded it a little bit to make it no longer a prayer for the restoration of sacrifices, but a prayer commemorating the sacrifices. And thus kept the Musaf, but changed the intent of that prayer service. You'll see now that when we recommend the Koran Sidur to you, that's the traditional text. So you'll see it's a prayer for restoration of the sacrificial system, whether it be the Sabbath sacrifices or the holiday sacrifices. There's a whole discussion in Jewish literature about it. Will there be sacrifices in the rebuilt temple? Some of the rabbis said no, some of the rabbis said yes. We'll worry about, as far as I'm concerned, if the third temple is ever built, and since there's a legend that says it's going to come down from heaven, if it comes down from heaven and God wants sacrifices, we'll have sacrifices. If he doesn't want us to have sacrifices, we won't have sacrifices. Right? And we'll talk about sacrifices too later on, just to understand that there's much more to them than simply killing an animal and putting their blood on the altar and burning it all up. Then there's concluding part of the service, and we go home. The afternoon service is very short. On Shabbat, on the weekday, it's just one psalm, followed by the Amidah. And on a weekday, the Amidah is pretty much the same for all three services. On Shabbat, we lengthen it a little bit, and we add in a short Torah reading. And the Amidah of the Sabbath. Each one of the Sabbath Amidot are different. The first three and the last three, like always, are the same, but the middle blessing is a little bit different in construction. So now we've gone through the day. You've been in shul. You went to shul for mincha. That's the afternoon service. And you went down into the basement where they usually have the Sudah Shlishit or wherever they have the third Sabbath meal. And you either had a nice bit of gefilte fish, or a piece of cake, or a little bit of a roll, or stale bread, whatever it may be. And now it's 42 minutes after Shabbat, after sunset. It is now the next day. It's the beginning of the week. So we recognize that first by reciting the evening service. There's an evening service every night. And as part of the evening service, we recite the Havdalah. Havdalah means separation. We want to separate from the Sabbath to the weekday. So the ritual takes place in the synagogue and at home. It may vary a little bit at the synagogue and home. At home, it consists of the following. We light a special candle. The candle has to have at least 2 wicks. We have a glass of wine, and we have some besamim, some spices that we can smell. There's an introductory paragraph. Then we say the blessing over the wine again, Borei Pri Hagafen. Then we say the blessing for the spices. We take a bit of the spice, and before we smell, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Borei Minei bisamim, it creates the different kinds of spices. And you take a little whiff of it. Why do we have spices? Well, there is a tradition that says that on the Sabbath we have an extra neshama, an extra soul that enters the heart, enters every Jewish person. And that neshama, that extra soul, departs on Saturday night. So when the soul departs from us, that extra special soul, the neshama yetera, you feel a little weak. So you have some smelling salt, something to perk you up a little bit. That's why you smell the spices. Or it's a reminder of the special spice of the Sabbath. Finally, we then say the blessing over that special candle, Borei Morei Ha'esh. We look at our fingers, so we're making use of the candle. We take a look at your nails, maybe. You need to go to the, I never go to one. My wife gets her nails done, I don't. And then we say blessing Havdalah, we take a little bit of the wine, and now we're back on the weekday. So that's how your 24 hours of Shabbat can be filled. You begin preparation before Shabbat. Get ready for Shabbat. You have your meals all ready for Shabbat. You have synagogue services that you hopefully can make. You have a special meal that you hopefully will make. Guys, you can help on cooking the meal too. I don't know what your households do, who cooks what. I'm the barbecue specialist. To sing, to share words of Torah if you can. Read the Torah portion from that week and go over it together and struggle with it. That's why it's good to have commentaries to see how they try and deal with some things. Some things are easy to understand, some are not. Study, learn, do your homework, study homework for this class. Have a nice relaxing evening, have a nice relaxing day, have the synagogue, coming home, take a walk, enjoy the nature around you, and say goodbye to the Sabbath. That's the way it goes. All right? Now, are there any questions on from tonight? Nobody? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Will you send us like that schedule that you described?
Yeah, I will send you. By the way, in the book, that the table of contents of the book has really the schedule, as it were, for the at least at home. The table of contents essentially is what takes place at home. That's why I asked at least to read the beginning of each of the chapters, the introduction to it. But I will give you, some point this week, I hope I will get it out to you. We have to remember next week we're going to be talking about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, because that's around the corner, literally. And we have some things to say about that and forgiveness and those important items. Anything else? All right. So Mackenzie and Jonathan, you will send me your email, and I will send you what I have, information that you need, and also the website. You can go on to YouTube to see the lessons that we've done. Okay. The one benefit I have here is that I can record it. All right. Okay. Hopefully this will make something different for your coming up Shabbat. I'll say Shabbat Shalom, and next week we'll say L'Shana Tova, Happy New Year. Okay. Good night.